Okay. And I started actually with this, it's almost 10 years ago now, with this public education project in partnership with a land trust, which out near where I live. And the goal was to illuminate some of the reasons why it's difficult or sometimes impossible for small food businesses, including small farms, to survive economically. And so we had sort of case studies in 6 towns and looked at 6 farms and went out and talked to people at farmers markets and festivals and things, and just to try to kind of get into some of the complexities of trying to survive in on a small scale in a system that is very geared now toward the large scale. So the short answer to like why it's so hard is, competition, consolidation of bigger and bigger companies, kind of economies of scale that make it very hard for small scale producers in many places to compete, certainly on price and convenience and kind of image there. So, but what was interesting about this was that I realized partway through that project, so I had a summer and a fall that I was out tabling at things. And I realized partway through that I had been thinking of the farms as kind of the history part. I'm interested in the history of how we know about farming. And I had been looking sort of historically and anthropologically at the so-called alternatives, like the little farms. But I wasn't thinking historically or anthropologically about what they were trying to be alternative to, which is this supermarket centered food system that is how a lot of us get our food. And one of the things I realized in doing the project is actually just how old that model is. We tend to think of it as it's shiny new. It's very shiny, and so it makes us think it's always new. But in fact, supermarkets or chain grocery stores, and put it that way, have been around for more than 100 years in the US, and they sort of grew there the fastest. So they came around, 1912 was the first A&P. It was called the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Companies. A&P is the shorthand, which was a very dominant brand for a long time. They were one of the first ones to figure out this chain model, sort of the franchise model. And so you can see there just how quickly they grew in that first, couple of decades of the 20th centuries. So they went from 4% just after World War I to almost a third of the market in not well before World War II, and really since World War II is when that's become much more the norm in a lot of places. So, and it's still expanding really all over the world. So that was the first. They talked about it as like an economy, kind of a no frills, generic brands, kind of cutting the prices, getting bigger, making much more complex, warehousing systems and purchasing systems, because they could then offer cheaper prices to consumers who were very excited about that. So it also they figured out ways to lower the labor costs, to entice people with like impulse buying, and linked with mass marketing and new, kind of new, very large brands that were beginning to assert themselves, and very large, beginning to be very large sort of food conglomerations of brands. So that was the start of this chain grocery, something that we don't really think of as innovative at this point, but was sort of a thunderclap when it happened in 1916, was the first self-service grocery. So that older model, you would go in, there'd be somebody behind a counter, and they'd reach up on a shelf and take down whatever you asked them to get, can of beans or whatever. And then in 1916, this company in Tennessee called Piggly Wiggly, which was named for this sort of maze-like structure of the store. It wasn't just a person behind a counter, but you went through kind of this maze and you picked your own groceries. And again, it just seems totally natural now because we've learned to do it, but it wasn't in the beginning. It was like, wow, what an innovation this is. I can just go and reach out my hand and put it in my basket. And then, you'd pay at the end, obviously, but it really felt like, literally being able to choose anything you wanted, which was a very seductive kind of feeling. So that was a really big thing. People had to learn to use like shopping carts and baskets and to wait in line and stuff, but they did. And then this was the first true supermarket. in New York in 1930. It didn't really take off at that point, mainly because of the Depression and then World War II in the U.S. Kind of took over at that point. But after the war, this was the model that became um, very dominant. So, and what made it super was pulling in all the things that used to be little stores like bakeries and fishmongers and the deli, the produce cart, all of those things, and pulling them all into one store under one roof. So you didn't have to go anywhere else, and that was the big discovery. Is like if you get them in and they can buy everything there, they don't go anywhere else. They will just spend all your money there. So and there was also a decision once they did that. You could do this once you had everything under one roof. You could say, okay, it's really hard to make money on milk, and that's another long story about milk carries a very low profit margin in the US. There's too much of it. It is overabundant, and so the prices are low. And it's a long story. I won't get into the whole milk story here, but everybody pretty much loses money on milk. It's what's called a loss leader. But you could do that if people would come to the store because they needed milk, and we still see this every time there's a storm. Everybody in the US apparently has to buy milk and bread, or everybody who is kind of eating that kind of culinary tradition. So that's okay. You can lose money on some things and make it back because you've got them doing you've got people buying everything in the same store. So that was a really big economic and structural kind of innovation that again has come to seem really normal and natural, but it was quite different from what had gone before. And shoppers in much of the world have learned to not just navigate this, but expect it and want it and feel like this is a need to have everything in one place. I don't want to have to go to four little stores. I want to just go to the supermarket, get what I want, and then go home. And that is how the familiar sort of stays familiar and unquestioned and often hard to change because it just feels so natural. It just feels like this is the way things should be. So I've been working to really, as I said, to defamiliarize the supermarket for myself and for my students, and also for the people I would like to shop at our little grocery store, which is a more sort of locally oriented grocery store. But to talk about this, why the supermarket is in our head as much as it is, because it's a way to I think, foster some resistance and some a way to support some alternatives in a way that goes beyond just I'll just buy something every now and again, but to say could we grow some alternatives and really have them be robust and more than just alternative, kind of relocalize some of the food system that we have. So this is my kind of my effort to build stronger understandings of what we've got in order to support efforts to make some change. Because supermarkets are really good at giving us what we want. They're really good. They're very persuasive. They're sometimes very overwhelming and intentionally so. We'll talk about that in a minute. And most of us have become very acclimated to them. It's very interesting when somebody who's not familiar with supermarkets, comes to a place where they're very common and often they feel very overwhelmed and that's intentional. It's supposed to sort of, drag you in and kind of lull you into a sense of like everything is here that I could possibly need. So. And we can maybe talk about this at the end. There'll be some time for some Q&A, but kind of if you're how embedded you are in the supermarket centered system versus are you getting your food in some other ways and how and why and how that relates to particular places and economies and values and places that have enacted policies that maybe have protected other ways of selling and growing food. So. But let me just sort of raise a couple of big points about the supermarket and kind of how, in that effort of kind of defamiliarizing. So, first is about sort of use of space and economics. And this is, so here's, the supermarket has become is pretty familiar. It's like people kind of know, and if you're used to shopping in a supermarket, you can gonna go into a supermarket almost anywhere in the world and know roughly where you'll find certain kinds of things. So these are pictures. I don't know where the bottom one is. It's very generic. The top one I think it's in Eastern Europe, and I can't remember which. Maybe the Czech Republic, but it doesn't matter, right? It could be almost anywhere. So there is a very sort of generic look and also layout. And part of it goes back to that Piggly Wiggly, and there's a slightly bigger view of this. It looks so sort of old-fashioned now, probably to most of us, but really was a very startling thing to people that they could just sort of wander the aisles freely and pick what they wanted. And if you notice, there's one way in. You have to go through the turnstile, then you have to go through the maze to get to the cash register, and then there's one way out. So you got to pay, and then you come out. So that encourages impulse buying. It encourages standing in the line and maybe seeing things you didn't know you needed. Lots of sensory stimuli, including especially visual. Um, it works against sort of focused, purposeful shopping. They want you to browse, they want you to wander, and they tend to put the low margin items, low margin staple items at the very far end. So if you think about a supermarket layout and think about what is kind of diagonally across from the front entrance, and in US supermarkets and a lot of supermarkets, it tends to be the dairy, which is low margin, but for people that are eating dairy, that's often the main reason they're going to the supermarket. So they'll have to go through the entire supermarket to get to the low margin thing, and then they have to see all the stuff on the aisles on the way there and on the way back. So that's how that we're sort of trained and steered to move through the supermarket in a certain way. And then the center there, that lower picture is the mostly the what's called shelf stable foods, so processed and manufactured and packaged foods that don't have to be refrigerated. The fresher, wholer foods tend to be those things that are around the perimeter, partly because they need refrigeration and usually electricity. They need more infrastructure, basically, including what's called the cold chain. They attach to the cold chain, so that's basically this network of storage, processing, distribution, and transportation, and then storage in the stores, and then storage in homes, where people are using home refrigeration. And it's pretty seamless in a lot of places now, where there really is this sort of conduit that food travels through and is held at appropriate temperatures. It's how we've managed to create a really strikingly safe, with some occasional startling lapses, but safe and modern food system is because of refrigeration. Um, so, um, but there's all this stuff around the edges, which often does need to be refrigerated, not all of it. Some of it, like the meat and the fish, the deli, the salad bar, the dairy. But then there's the produce and the bakery, which are not as connected to the cold chain immediately. And that you may have heard the advice that, like, if you want to eat more healthfully, you should shop the perimeter rather than the center of the supermarket. Um, this is food more like it was before supermarkets came along. So there's a person behind a counter, and they take an order usually. Not always, but in many cases. So like the fish counter, you're probably, you're asking somebody to cut you off a piece of fish, and sometimes that's part of the almost the display of, kind of authenticity and real food, is like, here's an actual person who is preparing your fish for you. And that was that big innovation in 1930, to literally bring all these things together. And so every section here of a supermarket around the edges was once a more viable sector. It was like, there were every town, it would have, multiple bakeries and probably some market gardeners, and some places still do have that. And there are places that have people value that, and they continue to foster it. But the supermarket aims to bring all of that into its own environment. So the dairy, the butcher, the deli, the market produce. So architecturally and symbolically, and performatively, this really is replicating like a village when you think about it, or a town, right? This is like all the little stores, and the aesthetics of it, when you look at it, often are intended to convey that. The bread is in baskets, in wicker baskets. There's no need for a supermarket to put bread in its wicker baskets, but that invokes bakery, right? Small town bakery, or to have a display that is something you might see in like a small scale meat, a meat shop, a butcher. So, and there's this sort of quasi artisanal staffing that are, sometimes it is just sort of performative, sometimes it's more than just that. And so we can think of supermarkets as sort of absorbing and really kind of collapsing whole food ecosystems really into themselves. And they're pulling them into this centrifuge of the supermarket, into one very highly controlled space, and linked with these huge networks of distribution and supply. And so most big supermarkets have their own network of warehouses, their own trucking systems. They control that all. And that was the A&P model right from the very beginning, to figure out how to centralize the warehouses, get really good prices out of the big suppliers, and then pass those along to the shoppers, who would then come shop with you because your prices were lower than someone else's. So that's the first thing about kind of the space and economics of the system. And then the other is, it's a somewhat more wonky point, but it's that book that I just wrote is called Food Margins. And the wonky point I want to get across to more people is that it's really important to think about profit margins in the grocery business, which is not something that most of us think about when we think about food. Maybe there's people that are like aiming toward an economics major who might be starting to think about that, but I think most eaters are not thinking about this. And the key point here is that supermarkets are a very high volume, very low margin business. So you can see here, this is just comparative rates of profit margins in different sectors. So not the size of the sector, but the size of the profit that you can get out of whatever you're selling. So, oil, tobacco, banking is good. If you're selling money, it's a really good way to make money. But selling food is a terrible way to make money. And this is one of my big takeaways from being involved in actual grocery stores. A terrible, terrible way to make money, unless you're very, very large, or you have some really specific niche market. And the supermarkets are very, very large and make it almost impossible for others to compete with their prices, which are the reason that the profit margin is so low is that they've driven the prices down just about as low as they can go. And it's interesting now in the US, some other places, there's been food inflation of prices in the last couple of years, and people are very convinced still that the big companies are gouging people, and there's a lot of profiteering. And it's actually a very misplaced fear. There's been some very selective corporations using their big clout to sort of extract more profit. But this, looking at this, the big food companies, they're making a huge amount of money because everybody has to eat, and most people don't grow our own food, but they're not making much profit. So, and this just is a sort of facet that makes it very hard to change the food system, because everything we could do to change it, to decentralize it, to make it more local, would raise food prices. And that is sort of in conflict with this kind of the system that's been set up. So these low prices are achieved by very big economies of scale, by very efficient, industrial production, by paring down the labor as much as possible. So, now we have self-checkout. And it's like the customers will do some of the labor. Soon it will all be smart carts. The cart will just, kind of check us out, and there won't need to be even people monitoring the self-checkouts. So, and supermarkets have also gotten really good at finding other ways to make money besides selling food. So they literally sell space on their shelves to big food corporations, or sell space in their flyers. They're basically selling, the visibility that they have. So it's kind of a pay to play system where all the big companies are kind of supporting each other there, and they're hugely competitive with each other here. So I don't know if you can see this, and I'm going to try to move my little box around here, but basically this is just showing in the US, where the dominant food corporations are, the supermarket corporations, and you can tell that if you're familiar with the yellow star on the blue background, that Walmart is the biggest grocery company in the world, and also the biggest corporation in the world as well. But it's a very, very highly consolidated sector, and it's like these giants duking it out with each other. And even where there seemed to be sort of some regional strength, so Hannaford, which started in the state of Maine, um, is actually owned by the same corporation that owns Stop and Shop, which started in Massachusetts. And those are two fairly well-loved regional chains, but they're both owned by the same European corporation called Ahold Delhaize, which is sort of Belgian and Dutch. And they own other things up and down the East Coast. So very consolidated, and Kroger and Albertsons, which are two of the behemoths in the American Midwest, are currently trying to merge. And it's a very interesting moment because the federal government, which is starting to push back against some of this consolidation, is trying to keep them from merging. And they're saying, well, we have to merge because we're competing with Walmart, which isn't just a food company. It's selling everything. It's what's called a hypermarket, like Walmart and Target, which are these corporations that you can buy food and everything else under one roof. And so the big food corporations, the big supermarkets, are saying, well, to compete with that, we have to be even bigger. So that it's a really interesting moment when that's being kind of thought out. Um, so, all right, I think there's a lot more that we could say about all of this. We're at 6:30, and I feel like I want to leave some time to talk a little bit and to see what questions you might have. Let me just finish with this. Just if you're interested in, if you do come to Tufts, that, as I say, we do have this food systems and nutrition minor. If you take an environmental studies major, you can do that as a standalone applied environmental studies, or as a co-major, but there's a food nutrition and environment track within that. So if you're interested in food studies, there's a fall class called food systems, that's kind of the intro overview class, and we hold seats for first years there. And then if you're interested, let me move my little box again so you can get at the QR code if you want to. So this is a project that my students and I have developed over the last couple of years to try to, it's called Learning from Food Waste, the elephant in the refrigerator, to try to open up some of the misconceptions and preconceptions about food waste, which is, sort of seen as just a terrible, terrible thing in the food system, the modern food system, especially in comparison with food insecurity and people who don't have enough food, which, and rightly, those are two terrible problems. But people don't really understand why there's so much food to waste, or why getting the food to the people is not necessarily a way to solve either problem. And so it's trying to just unpack that really paradoxical, crazy, literally crazy situation a little more clearly in the form of a podcast. So you can get to it if you want to scan that QR code, but you can also find it on Spotify. So just search for Learning from Food Waste. You should be able to find it. 7 episodes. It was our attempt to explain the entire food system to you in just over an hour. So if you're interested in following up on some of this, that might be a good way to do it too. So I think I'm going to stop there. And Will, I don't know if you want to reappear. And see if people have questions. And I'll I'm looking at the chat here. So, and I wasn't looking at that while I was talking. So, um, I have not seen the Anthropocene reviewed, but I know John Green. All right, I will look that up. Thank you. Great tip, Paulina. So, yeah, how did concept of supermarkets impact the other types of stores and store owners psychologically, competitively, and otherwise during its initial popularity after the Second World War? That's a great question. Basically, it's been sort of a slow process. There have always been people who really loved the newness and the novelty and the coolness of the supermarket, but also people that have been very loyal to smaller stores and kind of neighborhood food ecologies. So I think for quite a long time they were more competitive until really like the 1970s and 80s. One of the things that really shifted that was computer technology, where so this was like the whole that warehousing system on steroids, because then they could source even more widely and get things where they needed to be even more efficiently. And that really there was sort of a tipping point where the small stores just couldn't compete on price, and loyalty wasn't enough anymore. So psychologically, and I can tell you this because I try to help run a small grocery store, and it's really, really hard. It's really hard to kind of convince people without sounding preachy about it, which is the downside of like, you should do this. This is a good thing to do, and support your neighbors. And people people know that, but it's hard to put that against, the convenience of I'm tired, I'm busy, I just need to get everything and go home. So it's been a slow struggle. I would say it's a struggle. And it's still going on. And as people try to, kind of bring back some of these smaller supply chains. And then you have a lot of questions about supermarkets. This is great. So what is psychology behind the layout of items? Wouldn't cheap products at the front of the store encourage more customers? The customers, the psychology is they're going to come anyway because they want milk, right? So put it at the very farthest end, because they're gonna come here anyway, and that way they have to walk through the store. Because if you put the cheap stuff at the front and they only buy the cheap stuff, that 1 to 3% profit margin is even lower, right? So you really need them to buy the other stuff, and especially the impulse buys that maybe they carry a higher margin, because that's what offsets it's called the loss leader, of selling some things very cheaply. And then last comment here is just people adjusted to getting products on their own. Yeah, with the advent of AI and assist technology, yeah. Um, how do I think with the people and to that extent economy and competitive market, accustomed? Yes, absolutely. And this is where my colleague Nick Sieber's work, I think, is really interesting and revealing, because he and a lot of other anthropologists right now are looking at like um, how does AI and assistive technologies and these sort of cyborgian changes that are happening in so many of the things we do in our lives, how does that alter our expectations and our behaviors and our patterns, and that I think is I mean, it's very interesting. And I think there's also some interesting signs of pushback around that. So I have a lot of students. Maybe I see them more because they tend to be the food studies students who are interested in, alternative food systems or farming or, sustainability, that they often want to support. They are trying not to be seduced by that. And sometimes it's sort of a conflict. Sometimes I see them wanting to support the little stores, but also being, sort of enticed by this whiz bang, amazing technology. And it is amazing. I mean, it's like literally some of the technology is, there's cameras on the shelves that look at what you look at, and they're measuring how long you look at it and whether your face is like intrigued or annoyed. And they then are seeing what you take and put in your cart, and then they scan that automatically. Like they're interacting on a very embodied, and sort of emotional affective level. So I think it's a new frontier that's going to be really interesting to see, if it continues in that direction. And then we have a question. Oh, good question. I was wondering about the average number of students in anthropology and environmental studies at Tufts. So, good question. So we have in anthropology, we actually made a decision quite a number of years ago to do away with the giant intro class of 150 students because we were finding that it was sorry, I'm breaking up a little because my computer wants to do something. Okay. Because people were having a better experience in smaller scale classes. So we'll have like 50 to 60 person is kind of our intro size for an introductory class. Um, Environmental studies has a bigger intro class that I think is like 80, but they are not the humongous, three, 400 person intro to psychology kinds of classes. So basically they're two majors where you'll have a um, more of an experience of actually getting to know a professor and having more discussion rather than just sort of lecture. So and then see, anthropology is a tool to research a certain topic. I was wondering how you're able to settle on a direction and what resources Tufts provides to help you specialize. A good question. So I can just tell you how I do it. And it's something I really enjoy doing with students is to sort of figure out what it is that excites you. Because I think after many years of teaching, I've kind of gotten a sense of how to gauge that. So, I actually have a requirement now that everybody in my class, even my 50-person class, come see me at least once during office hours, so I can actually have a face-to-face conversation with people. And that's a lot of what I do is just talk to me about what classes do you like, what's exciting to you, um, and I think we're generally, and Will, maybe you can weigh in on this too, having been through a Tufts degree. But I hope and think that we're pretty good at nurturing, if we see a spark of interest in a student, and then to think about what classes might really support that, what research opportunities to encourage people to go for. But Will, I feel like you maybe can field this better than I.
Sure, sure. And so just I didn't introduce myself. I'm an assistant director of admissions at Tufts. I graduated 4 years ago. I've taken a class with Cathy. Um, Being a student at Tufts, you're assigned a pre-major advisor. When you declare your major, you choose or work with a professor in the department that you're majoring with. So I was an anthropology major. Amal Bashar was my advisor, and when declaring my major, I went to her. I talked with her, and absolutely. So if I had any passion or interest or piece of anthropology that I was particularly interested in, I could go to her and ask, "Hey, I'm interested in this thing. Where can I get started on research? Can you guide me to the right resources? Can you point me to the right events inside of the department that I could participate in?" And not just in anthropology, but in pretty much all of our departments across campus, they host uh, tons of opportunities for students to engage in individual and group research. And when we say research, it really means a wide variety of self pursuit academic opportunities. I'm sure, Cathy, you've worked with many students who have said, "Oh, I want to study this, or I want to look into this, or I have an interest in food, but I don't really know where to go with it." And you kind of guide them along the path.
Yeah. Yeah, and we also think about, what are some internships you might do that would be along with that. I last fall I had three students doing independent studies. One was on industrial food, one was on um, ayahuasca use in New York State, and one was on an art project actually. And so we kind of put them all together, and we had a weekly meeting, and they just did their independent studies. So but yeah, I think there are lots of opportunities for discovering that, and kind of what you're, and we use the word passion a lot, but I use the word spark. I look at that and I can tell when somebody's talking. They'll come to me and say, "I have these two projects and I'm not sure which one I want to do." And they'll talk to me about them. It's like, I know which one you want to do. Like I'm telling, just like from the look in your eye when at that first one, you think you should do that, but you're not interested in it. Do the second one, right? So all right. Lucy Snow is saying, what kind of steps do you think? Oh, this is the $64,000 question. To make small grocery stores accessible to more people, including geographically and economically, because good quality, small scale, sustainably produced food is not as cheap as the stuff in the supermarket, and that means you have to go for an affluent clientele. That is a huge question, and it's a question for food and economic justice. And having come at this now from the grocer side of things, I can say it's like an insoluble puzzle, really, because we can't make it cheap. We can't, it's to be fair to the farmers and to for the store to survive. Our little store barely survives, and we can't raise prices anymore. We also can't lower them anymore. So I think the answer has to be something other than just trying to compete with the supermarkets on prices. So what we do is we have a very robust set of programs where we partner with nonprofits and government agencies and do a lot of grant partnerships and work with like social service agencies in the area, and we call them our community shares programs, so that we get good quality food to people who can't afford to buy it in a very structured way and in a way that also benefits the farmers or whoever we're sourcing from. It is a real dance, and that exactly is why we've got this food system that's so hard to change, right? Because to change it to make it better for farmers or for little stores, you would have to make the prices higher. And that makes it worse for people who already can't afford to access food. So that's the question I wrestle with literally every week. So, but thanks for asking it. And it's if you figure out the answer, let me know, because I feel like that is sort of this paradox that we exist within now. So here's somebody who wants to know the big question: the differences between anthropology and sociology. um, I often say we're like two disciplines separated at birth. We're very, very similar in some ways. Um, we're different in sort of two main ways. One is that historically, sociologists were the social scientists, the white social scientists in Europe who were studying Europe, and anthropologists were the white social scientists in Europe who were studying non-white people outside of Europe. And it's a sort of a very broad categorization, but it is true of early sociology and early anthropology. That's what has changed a lot over time, thank goodness. And there's been a lot of sort of soul searching about the cultural dynamics of that studying across cultural and often economic and racialized differences. So that's one of the main differences. And then the other is that by and large, anthropologists tend to be more interested cultural anthropologists tend to be more interested in sort of the qualitative side of human living and qualitative research and data. So more about sort of meanings, values. I think of it as kind of the software that runs a society. And sociologists, by and large, tend to be more interested in things like structures and kind of the forms of society, almost like the hardware of it. And that really is a broad generalization, and there are lots of people that are sort of in the middle that sort of wouldn't fall neatly into either of those categorizations. But broadly, I think there's more of a quantitative sensibility or more of an interest in structure on the sociology side, and more of an interest in meaning and meaning making, even for things like biological anthropology. They're sort of looking at more of like how does how does that kind of intersect that the more qualitative side of human living. So um, all right, let's see what else. I'm going from top to bottom here. Let me go from top here. Interested in increase my undergraduate research experiences. So would I say that quantitative methods are being addressed to social sciences or humanities? Yeah, big time. Absolutely. So classics just classics or yeah, Classics just hired somebody who does, he's thinking about environmental history in antiquity, but uses quantitative and, data modeling methods. We have a data visualization class in environmental studies. So yeah, definitely. That's sort of a frontier, I would say, of social sciences and humanities. So there's opportunities there. Lucy wants to know what's my favorite grocery store I've been to. That's such a great question. Actually, I have one that I really love that I didn't know about until students told me about it in one of my classes. It's called Neighborhood Produce, and it is in Ball Square, which is just outside of Tufts. It's like an easy, like a 10-minute walk. Do you ever shop at Neighborhood Produce? Will, you know? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So it's a little, I would say it's a mom and pop, which, it's kind of owned by a couple, Matt and Heather. They started with a teeny tiny little store in another part of Somerville, and then the one in Ball Square is a little bigger, but it's a small store, but you can buy most of your groceries there. They work on like minimal packaging, so there's like bulk stuff. It's not unlike a food co-op. There's a lot of kind of locally and regionally sourced stuff. There's a lot of the same stuff we sell in our co-op, but it's just a really friendly, neighborhoody kind of place. And it's the kind of place there used to be on like every corner. So and they source from they go to the wholesale Boston wholesale produce market every morning, I think, and get fresh stuff. It's very labor intensive, but I think that might be my current favorite grocery store. I really love it. So, interested in visual ethnography. Yeah. So again, Amal Bashara, so Will's advisor. I'm actually teaching a course on ethnographic film. I can't remember what it's called, but it's absolutely. So she's our kind of our media person, and definitely thinking about that in a really interesting way. She did her degree at New York University, which has a big film and media studies program in anthropology. So that's her jam. So um, another weird question. What if we created a complete nutritional formula encompassing for all the energy requirements for a working person using insert technology and get FT? You're looking for the magic pill, right? The magic pill that we don't have to eat. But what kind of tablet or formula, how would it impact food economy? Yeah, you're right. It does sound, and this is an idea that keeps coming up, kind of Soylent Green, or kind of ideas about what is the non-food food that would replace everything that we need. It's an interesting question. Um, I think I don't know. I guess I'm clinging to hope that that all the things that like real food, actual food production connects us to, which includes the soil that is the kind of what sustains life on Earth, right? Not just our own life, but many life forms, and the oceans. That getting our food from those sources is a way to think about ourselves within the ecology of the planet, which we have destabilized in a very, very serious way as we sit waiting for the second massive hurricane in 2 weeks to hit Florida and the southeast US. So I feel like there's every time this happens, um, there's more recognition. It's like, oh yeah, we need to care for the earth. We need to have a different relationship with it. And many people, and I would say this is partly how I got started with food studies too, see food as like our avenue for thinking about that and for relating to it. So I think for all the excitement about something like a magic pill that would give us all our nutrition, um, I hope that there's also a sort of a sense that there's something good to be gained from rebuilding that relationship, and from listening to, like, for example, indigenous people who have a much more reciprocal and caring relationship with the earth, who are saying very clearly, you modern white people, modern people in general, just have you're not in relation to the system that sustains all life. So it's sort of compelling idea, but also a sort of scary one. Literally, I just got this in the mail today. So it's a new book by Julie Guthman, who's mostly an anthropologist, and she's talking about Silicon Valley's these kinds of sort of techno-utopian projects around food, um, being created by people who are outside the food world and certainly outside the farming world, and who are going to like turn it's like these silver bullet kinds of solutions um, that don't do anything to sort of fix the way we're continuing to mess up the planet. So that's a long answer to say I'm hopeful that more people will continue to, kind of try to reconnect with the land and the earth that way, in a way that feels more ethical and relational. So it's not just sort of humans over here eating a pill, um, but people being in relation to the whole global ecosystem. So, and then this another good related question: perspectives on plant-based diets regarding the climate crisis. Really, really good question. So, I think, and you see this. So the my colleague Alex, who works on industrial meats and kind of the globalizing meat economy, which is just surging, and this idea that we need more and more and more meat, which is crazy. It's I think the damage of that is becoming clearer in terms of both health and ecosystem damage. Um, and so I think whether you think you should go all plant-based or more plant-based, I think that's incredibly wise to like um, everyone who currently eats meat could probably stand to eat less meat, and a lot of places people could stand to eat a whole lot less meat. It's a big industry, right? It's a huge industry and still growing. It's still ramping up. So Alex's his book Porkopolis was about he's not allowed to say where this was, which state, because he had to sign a NDA about it, but somewhere in the American prairie, um, an industrial hog farm that slaughters 19,000 hogs a day. It is now small compared with I think it's a 27-story hog farm that the Chinese have just brought online. These gigantic, like skyscrapers, they're really skyscraper factory farms, and so it is this business is increasingly globalized and increasingly large, and it can't be sustained. There's using the amount of land and water that is being used to grow feed for that's maybe who needs the magic pill is the industrial livestock, so we don't have to use so much of the earth's resources, just feeding them to feed us. So um, you have so many good questions here. This is great. So um, opinions of the food technology stuff popularized by the influencers, creating, yeah, solution nutritional boxes. I've kept an eye on all of that. And everybody's got one, and in some ways it's sort of building on like the meal kit boxes that the ugly produce kinds of boxes. Basically, I would say most or all of that is running on venture capital at the beginning. It can't make money. It just can't. I don't think. Looking at those models, and in fact, those seconds of produce kinds of boxes that have become popular and meal kits, it's like it only works while there's a lot of initial investment capital. Once they start competing with each other and consolidating and driving the price down and cutting the labor and all of that, you see them cratering very quickly. So I think I think it's worth taking a slightly longer view of it, to just say like this business model only works initially. It doesn't work beyond a certain horizon. So, and then what classes do I currently teach and what do I specialize in? So, as I said, I specialize in food studies, ethnographic methods, which was the course that Will took with me. The year he took it, we were partnering with a local farm they wanted to think about why they were so darn white. It was like everybody was white. The staff was white and the customers were white and the board was white. So we helped them kind of take a look at themselves, which was really interesting. So I teach that. I teach our ethnographic methods course. I teach that Intro to Food Systems course. And then a bookend course to that called Practicing in Food Systems, which is the practicum, again, project-based class. And then I sometimes teach our class called Myth and Ritual, Myth, Ritual, and Symbol. And then a class called Global Cities, which is an urban anthropology class that I teach in the spring. That's one of these sort of intro level 50-person classes. So let's go quickly here to the last one. So steps that people who might not necessarily have access to smaller scale grocery stores can take to limit their contributions to these corporations. That's a good way of asking it. It's like, what, not like, how do I go, completely switch completely, but what are some steps that you can take? There are really interesting things you can mail order. So look for, smaller companies that may be doing mail order because the internet has been kind of wonderful for a lot of small corporations or small companies that because they can reach a wider audience. So there's a uh, Timeless Foods, I think do a search for it. It's called Lentil Underground. I don't know if you're in the US, but it's a bunch of farmers in the Midwest who have discovered that or rediscovered that growing lentils is actually much better for the soil than growing like corn that just sucks nutrients out year after year. Lentils are a legume and they actually make the soil better. And so they're switching over, and then they sell it in small quantities. You can mail order it. So you're supporting like a consortium of I forget like 7 or 9 farms there. Um, White Earth Indian Reservation in Minnesota is it's a an Indian reservation, obviously, but they sell wild rice and maple syrup. They have small businesses like small ventures that they also sell online. So look around and see, don't be greenwashed by, Amazon's going to try to convince you that everything is supporting a small venture. So do a little looking around, but you can find these smaller companies, a lot of like spice companies, tea companies that you can order from, and you really support them by doing that. So that seems good. We're at 7. Is that
Cathy, thank you so much. This was
was really fun?
fantastic. Thank
Yeah.
you to all the attendees for your great questions. I hope you enjoyed the session tonight, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your night or early morning for the folks who are joining us super early this morning.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Wonderful. Awesome. Take care, everyone. Thank you, Cathy. Appreciate your time.
Thanks. You take care. We'll see you. Bye
Have
bye.
a great night.
Do you want to end things well? Or
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
I'll just I guess I can just leave there.